You know that silence, right? The one in the break room at a new job where the air smells like stale coffee and corporate indifference. The one where everyone else is part of the club, leaning against the counters, and you're just there. An accessory to the microwave. That was me, 3 weeks into my new marketing gig at this ridiculously cool agency, trying so hard to just be seen, to exist. Damien was there, of course. He was the creative lead, all effortless cool and inside jokes with his work wife, Priya. They weren't mean, not actively, but they had this force field. A bubble of shared history and easy laughter that felt impossible to penetrate. And God, I wanted in so badly. My brain was just a Rolodex of failure, flipping through anecdotes that were too boring, too weird, too me. I couldn't talk about my cat, that's lame. I couldn't talk about my trip to Portland, who cares? The silence was getting so loud, it felt like a physical pressure on my ears. And then, out of that desperate, panicked void, this story popped into my head. A terrible story. A story that was not mine to tell, a story that should have been locked in a vault. But the silence was killing me, and I blurted it out. This whole pressure cooker vibe reminds me of this totally wild time in college, I started, and their heads actually turned. I had an audience. My voice didn't even sound like my own, so I kept going. I told them about Inez. My roommate, my soulmate, my best friend. I didn't just tell them she had a breakdown. No, I painted a picture. I gave them details. I told them about the pressure she was under, the fine arts scholarship, her terrifyingly demanding parents, and how one night it all just shattered. I described finding her in our dorm room, surrounded by shredded canvases, whispering to herself. I described the hollow look in her eyes, the paramedics coming. I even did a little impression of her mom on the phone, all frantic and high-pitched. God, why did I do that? As they stared at me, their coffees getting cold, I felt a flash of pure terror. I had gone too far. I had to make it funny, right? I had to land the plane, so I laughed. A light, airy little laugh that felt like swallowing glass. But honestly, she's the sweetest person, I said, leaning in like I was sharing a delicious secret. You know, just that little bit of artsy kid sensitivity. It was all very dramatic. And they laughed. Damien actually chuckled and shook his head. Priya let out a little smile. For a glorious, shimmering 10 seconds, the force field was down. I was in. I felt this warm rush of acceptance, pure dopamine. And it felt so good that I almost didn't notice the sick, cold stone that had just settled in the pit of my stomach. That stone was the truth. It was a little voice whispering, "You're a monster, Lorelai. You just sold your best friend for a cheap laugh in a shitty break room." But I told it to shut up. I just smiled wider. That high, that feeling of being included, it carried me through the rest of the day. It was like a drug, honestly. Damien even stopped by my desk later. "That college story was nuts," he said, a real smile in his eyes. "We're grabbing drinks on Friday at the Gilded Lily, you should come." Can you believe that? I was so buzzed I could barely type out a coherent email. I had done it. I was in the inner circle. The sick feeling about Inez was still there, like a low-grade hum in the background, but I just turned up the volume on everything else. It's fine, I told myself. It was years ago. She'd probably laugh about it now, too. It's amazing the lies you tell yourself when you want something bad enough, you know. That night, I tried to smooth it over in my own head. I decided I'd just check in on her, prove to myself that everything was okay. I scrolled through my phone and found our chat thread. It was mostly her sending me links to articles she thought I'd like, and me replying with a thumbs-up emoji hours later. God, I was already a terrible friend, wasn't I? I typed out a message, trying to make it sound casual, breezy. "Hey, had the weirdest flashback to our crazy college days today. Hope you're doing amazing. How's everything?" I hit send, feeling a little bit of the guilt wash away. See, I'm a good friend, I'm checking in. The minutes ticked by, then an hour, then 2. Usually, Inez replied fast. Too fast sometimes. Her messages would pop up before I'd even put my phone down. But this time, nothing. I started making excuses for her. Maybe she's in a class or her phone died. Right, perfectly logical explanations. I went to bed feeling a little anxious, but still mostly high on my social victory. The reply came the next morning. It was just one word. Not even a full sentence, just, "Fine." No exclamation point, no emoji, nothing, just fine. It was so final, so cold, it was like a door slamming shut. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. That one word felt heavier than a whole paragraph of accusations. It was the kind of fine that means the exact opposite. And for the first time since that stupid break room conversation, the high from being accepted started to curdle into something that felt a lot like dread. But I pushed it down. I had to. I had a new life to build, right? I told myself she was just busy. She had to be. The dread didn't just linger, it metastasized. It was this constant, low-level hum of anxiety under my skin for the next couple of days. Every notification on my phone made my heart leap into my throat, hoping it was her, and every time it wasn't, the knot in my stomach tightened. I found myself obsessively checking her last seen status on the messaging app. Pathetic, right? Like some kind of digital stalker. On Wednesday, I decided I couldn't live in this silent purgatory anymore. I was going to look at her Instagram, see what she was up to. My plan was to find a picture of her cat, a sunset, anything, and leave a breezy, normal comment. You know, OMG, love that sweater. The kind of casual, meaningless performance you put on to convince yourself and the other person that nothing is fundamentally broken. But when I typed her username into the search bar, the app just blinked at me. User not found. My heart did this weird, painful lurch. That's strange, I thought, a cold sweat starting on my neck. Maybe she changed her handle. Denial is a powerful thing, so I went to Facebook, my fingers feeling clumsy and slow. Same thing, I was no longer her friend. The button that used to say message was gone. I frantically searched for a tagged photo of us from a mutual friend's page, and when I found one, her name was just dead, black text. Unclickable, I couldn't see her profile, her pictures, her life. I had been removed, blocked, wiped clean. The panic started then. Not the low hum of anxiety, but a full-blown, five-alarm fire in my chest. This wasn't her being busy or in a mood. This was an action, a deliberate, methodical, and chillingly silent erasing of me from her life. I immediately grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and called her. Straight to voicemail. Not even a single ring, blocked there too. I tried again as if the second time would magically break through the digital wall she'd built. Voicemail. Okay. Now I was spiraling. I switched back to text messages, the ones that still said delivered, a cruel lie, and started typing. My thumbs were flying, my brain just a mess of static and fear. The first message was a masterpiece of feigned innocence. Hey, is something wrong with your social media? Can't seem to find you anywhere. Call me. An hour of the loudest silence I have ever heard passed. Then I sent another one, the pleading creeping in. Inez, seriously, what's going on? If this is about something I said or did, you have to tell me. We can talk about it. Please. More silence. The silence felt like it was mocking me, laughing at my powerlessness. By the evening, my desperation had curdled into something ugly, self-righteous anger. It's crazy how fast your brain tries to protect its fragile ego, right? It flips from "what did I do?" to "how dare you?" in a split second. You know, this is really childish, Inez. Just ignoring me. If you're mad, just say it. You don't have to be so dramatic about everything. And then, the one I can still taste like poison in my mouth. Fine, be that way. I honestly don't get why you're making such a big deal out of this anyway. It was just a story. Each message I sent was a little blue bubble of my own insanity, floating off into a void. There were no replies, no angry tirades, no tearful accusations, just nothing. It was the digital equivalent of having your security clearance revoked. She wasn't fighting with me. She was decommissioning me. This total, procedural severing of ties was so much more brutal than any fight we could have had. It was a verdict, delivered without a trial. It said, you are no longer a person in my life. You do not get a vote. You do not get an appeal. You do not even get an explanation. And that, I was starting to realize, was a kind of pain I had never, ever experienced before. It was the pain of becoming a ghost to someone who was still alive. By Friday, I was a complete wreck on the inside, but a master of disguise on the outside. I'd barely slept, my mind a toxic carousel of her name, my unanswered texts, and the deafening silence. But I slapped on extra concealer, put on my best, I'm a creative professional who is totally thriving outfit, and walked into the office. The thought of those after-work drinks with Damien and the crew was the one flickering light at the end of a very dark tunnel. This was what it was all for, right? This was the prize. I just had to compartmentalize. I had to shove the whole Inez situation into a mental box, lock it, and deal with it later. She was overreacting, I told myself, a mantra on repeat. This new life, these new, cool, important friends, this was what mattered now. The bar was exactly as I'd imagined. The gilded lily, all dark wood, Edison bulbs, and the low hum of people who were important, or at least looked the part. I saw them in a corner booth, laughing, and my heart did a nervous, hopeful little flutter. Damien saw me and waved me over. I slid in, the leather of the booth cool against my clammy skin. For the first hour, it was perfect. It was everything I had fantasized about. I was laughing at the right moments, nodding along to the industry gossip, actually contributing a halfway intelligent thought about a new ad campaign. I was one of them. I bought a round of ridiculously expensive cocktails, feeling a surge of validation as Damien raised his glass. To Lorelai, our new star player, he'd said with a grin. And in that moment, the sick feeling in my stomach almost disappeared. This was it. I had arrived. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the vibe started to shift. Or maybe the alcohol was just wearing off, and I was starting to notice what was already there. A weird, split-second pause in the conversation when I'd start to speak. A quick, unreadable glance exchanged between Priya and another designer, Kenji, when I mentioned my old job. It was subtle, but it was there. I felt that old, familiar chill of being the outsider again, the new kid desperately trying to understand the rules of the game. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, my own guilt about Inez projecting onto them. So I tried harder. I told another story, a safe one this time, about a disastrous vacation in Mexico. It got a few polite, weak smiles. The conversational ball was never passed back to me. Later, I was standing at the crowded bar, trying to flag down the bartender, when Priya came up beside me. She wasn't smiling. "Hey," she said, her voice low, barely audible over the music. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" We shuffled over to a slightly quieter corner, near the drafty emergency exit, and my stomach twisted into a knot of pure dread. I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat about her weekend plans. "Look, Lorelai," she started, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve, not quite meeting my eyes. "This is super awkward, and honestly, I probably shouldn't even be saying anything, but about that story you told the other day. The one about your friend." I forced a laugh that sounded brittle and fake, even to my own ears. Oh God, that. It was just some stupid, ancient college drama. Honestly, it sounds way worse than it was. "Right," she said, and her eyes finally met mine. There was no malice in them, no judgment, just a kind of clinical pity that was 1,000 times worse. It made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. "It's just, Damien said something after you left the break room." She took a deep breath, like she was about to jump into cold water. "He said, if she can tell a story like that about her best friend, laughing about it, just imagine what she'd say about us behind our backs." The floor just dropped out from under me. The loud, thumping bass of the bar faded into a dull roar in my ears. I just stared at her, my mouth slightly open. My brilliant move, my clever in. It hadn't been a bonding moment. It had been a character assessment, an audition, and I had failed in the most spectacular way possible. I hadn't shown them I was fun and relatable. I had shown them I was a traitor. I had handed them a detailed, notarized resume of my own untrustworthiness. The very thing I did to gain their acceptance was the exact reason they would never, ever truly let me in. The prize I had sold my soul for wasn't just fake, it was a trap. And I had walked right into it, smiling the whole damn way. That comment was like a switch being flipped. After that night at the bar, everything changed. It wasn't a big, dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter and way more corrosive. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. The invitations to lunch stopped coming. My emails about non-essential work stuff would get answered a day later, if at all. When I'd walk over to a group chatting by the coffee machine, the conversation would just fizzle out. They'd find reasons to walk back to their desks, leaving me standing there alone. It was a masterclass in polite, professional exclusion. Damien was the worst. He was never rude to me in meetings. He'd nod at my ideas, say things like, "Good thought, Lorelei, let's circle back on that," and then never circle back. He treated me like a piece of furniture he was obligated to acknowledge, but had no intention of ever using. The warmth from that first week was gone, replaced by a bland, impenetrable civility that was colder than any insult. I was a ghost in that office. I was there, but I wasn't. My work started to suffer. How can you be creative when you feel like you're screaming into a void? I'd pitch an idea, and it would be met with this wall of polite indifference. Then, a week later, I'd see Kenji present a suspiciously similar concept, and everyone would be raving about it. I started to second-guess everything. Was I being paranoid, or was I being deliberately sidelined? The uncertainty was making me crazy. I tried to fix it. God, I tried. I brought in donuts for the team. I offered to take on the shittiest parts of a project no one wanted. I'd compliment Priya on her shoes. Every attempt was met with that same gentle, smiling deflection. My acts of penance were seen for what they were, the desperate flailing of someone who knew they'd messed up. They didn't want my donuts. They wanted me to be a person they could trust, and I had already shown them that I wasn't. The irony was suffocating. I had sacrificed my oldest, truest friendship on the altar of professional acceptance. And in doing so, I had made myself a pariah. I had betrayed Inez to get into a club that, as it turned out, had one primary rule: no traitors allowed. I was completely, utterly alone, caught in a social no-man's land of my own making. The silence from Inez on my phone felt exactly like the silence I now faced every day at my desk. It was all the same silence, the one I had created. After 3 more months of that slow-motion professional death, I finally gave up. I gave my 2 weeks' notice. There was no counteroffer, just a brisk and slightly relieved sounding, "We wish you the best in your future endeavors," from HR. My last day was a quiet affair. A few people said a polite goodbye. Damien gave me a brief nod from across the room. No one signed a card. I decided to leave the city altogether. There were too many ghosts here. The ghost of my dream job, the ghost of the person I thought I could be, and the biggest ghost of all, Inez. Packing up my apartment was like excavating a tomb. In a box of old college memorabilia, under a dusty sweatshirt, I found it. A photo of me and Inez at graduation. We were wearing our caps and gowns, arms slung around each other, grinning so wide it looked like our faces would crack. We looked so happy, so certain of everything. We were a team. Holding that picture, the full weight of what I had done finally crashed down on me, with no more room for excuses or justifications. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and I wrote her a letter, on actual paper. I filled 3 pages, pouring out everything. I told her how sorry I was, not just for the story, but for being a shitty, selfish friend who was so desperate to be liked that I used her deepest pain as a punchline. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just said I was sorry. I knew I'd never send it. It wasn't for her. It was for me. It was my confession. Later that night, mindlessly scrolling through my phone one last time, I saw a post from a mutual college friend. It was a gallery of photos from an art show opening. And there, in the 3rd picture, was Inez. She was standing in front of a huge, vibrant, abstract painting that was so full of life and color it almost hummed. Her hair was different, cut short and chic, and she was wearing this amazing, confident smile. She was surrounded by people who were looking at her art, with genuine admiration and love. She wasn't the fragile, broken girl from my story. She was the artist, the main character. She had moved on. She had healed. She had built a new, beautiful world for herself, a world that I had been rightfully kicked out of. And me, I was still back in that sterile break room, telling a stupid, cruel story to people who would never be my friends, stuck in the punchline of a joke that was never funny to begin with. Her life had moved forward into the light. Mine was just a box of old photos in a dark, empty room.